debate over the weekend hill.
The economy is expected to expand 2.5% this year.
Boosting Korea's ties with its global partners on the sidelines of the Status UN summit.
A massive drone attack on Ukraine overnight on Monday and Tuesday.
Arirang. President Lee has wrapped up summit talks with Brazilian President Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva in Brasilia and is now in Sao Paulo. Trade talks and critical minerals cooperation top the agenda. We have the key takeaways. Bloodbath on the bourse. Korea's benchmark KOSPI plunged nearly 11% on Tuesday as chipmakers led a broad market sell-off. We examine what sparked the rout and whether more volatility could lie ahead. And the heat is on. Korea's relentless heat wave is showing no signs of easing, with temperatures approaching 40 degrees Celsius. As vacation season gets underway, we take a look at how people here in the country are trying to stay cool. Good evening and great to have you with us on this Tuesday. I'm Song Yujin, filling in for Kim Dami. We begin tonight again in Brazil, where President Lee and Brazilian President Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva have pledged a new beginning in Korea and Brazil's strategic partnership. The focus of their summit in Brasilia on Monday were trade and critical minerals. President Lee is now in Sao Paulo, where he will meet with business leaders from both countries. Our Blue House correspondent Yoon Jung-min reports from Brazil.
The South Korean first couple received an official welcome by their Brazilian counterparts. President Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva gave the South Korean state guests a big hug upon arrival at the presidential palace in Brasilia. Bolstering cooperation was a focal point of Monday's summit between Presidents Lee and Lula, declaring this year as a new beginning for advanced strategic partnership. The leaders adopted a joint statement building upon the 4-year action plan adopted in February. The focus was resuming talks for the Korea-Mercosur trade agreement.
통상 환경의 불확실성이 커지는 시대일수록 한국과 메르코스르 간 무역 협정은 더 이상 미룰 수 없는 중요한 과제라는 것에 깊이 공감하였습니다.
I plan to ensure that there will be no obstacles to resuming negotiations on the trade agreement between Korea and Mercosur. In particular, I have designated our vice president to lead a working group.
The two men also agreed to bolster strategic cooperation in resources and energy to diversify supply chains.
브라질은 누구나 아는 것처럼 세계적인 핵심 광물 보유국입니다. 이번 회담에서 저와 룰라 대통령은 양국 기업과 기관 간의 핵심 광물 공급망의 전 주기에 걸친 협력 확대 필요성에 공감하였습니다.
The talks yielded key deliverables, including MOUs on space and industrial technology.
In September, we will have an opportunity to jointly launch a new projectile at the Alcântara Space Center, the symbol of our cooperation in technology.
The leaders also agreed to launch a defense industry joint committee in the latter half of this year and pursue an agreement on sharing and protecting military and defense information. They also agreed to strengthen coordination on key global issues and discussed peace on the Korean Peninsula. MOUs were signed for cooperation in the fields of film, sports, and education. Lee and Lula also strengthened personal bond by sharing their background as factory workers who overcame hardship.
After concluding the summit, President Lee will hold a Korea-Brazil business roundtable in Sao Paulo and meet the Korean community. Yoon Jung-min, Arirang News, Brasilia.
And after Brazil, President Lee's South America tour continues with visits to Chile and Argentina. Now, ahead of those stops, our senior foreign affairs correspondent Oh Soo-young spoke with an expert about what Korea hopes to gain and what it can offer through deeper ties with these resource-rich nations.
Shoring up energy cooperation with Latin America could help Korea clinch clean energy and critical minerals while supporting the region's development of higher value industries. That's according to Professor Kim Yong-jae, a leading expert in environmental and energy policy, as President Lee Jae-myung visits Brazil, Chile and Argentina this week. Lee's office has said that the three countries could help Korea diversify its supplies of energy and critical minerals, with Brazil's rare earths, Chile's copper and lithium, and Argentina's shale gas.
So for countries' flagship industry of batteries, semiconductors, and electric vehicles, in our case, right, diversifying these supply chains is no longer an option. It's important, a strategic move. Because of these two reasons, I think it's crucial a moment for a president's visit.
Korea, he says, can offer more than a mere market for resources and could help Chile develop its domestic processing industry.
And first of all, a jointly developed solar and wind capacity that, that powers both green hydrogen production and low carbon mining operations would be crucial. And second, use that clean power for a lithium processing so that Chile export not raw brine, but a low carbon battery materials, which is exactly what Korean battery makers need.
Brazil offers another opening in offshore wind, with a 2024 World Bank study putting the country's technical potential at more than 1,200 gigawatts. That is roughly 14 times the offshore wind capacity installed worldwide in 2024. But it's a fiercely contested market.
And realistic route is partnership with the Korean turbine, components, equipment manufacturing companies, working with the European and Brazilian incumbents would be our starting point.
Sturdy policy support is needed. Kim's study of more than 100 Korean firms and public bodies found around 40% recognized Latin America's importance, but few had moved to launch projects.
And mainly because of a lot of uncertainty, right? Political uncertainty and lack of information and institutional issues such as the permitting and land dispute are their major concerns. So this is the area that a Korean government can provide firms information about the, reducing some of their anxiety and concerns. And also on top of that, we might rely on existing platforms like a KOSPI, a knowledge sharing program.
As global competition over energy resources intensifies, Kim hopes to see more structured cooperation emerge through the state visit, giving Korea more resilient supply chains and Latin America a stronger industrial partner. Oh Soo-young, Arirang News.
Over to stocks, it was no doubt a turbulent day for Korea's market. After repeated trading curbs, the KOSPI briefly fell below the 6,000 mark for the first time since April. Baek Joo explains what drove the plunge.
Extreme market volatility gripped Korean financial markets, pushing the KOSPI below the 6,000 level intraday. The main KOSPI dropped over 10.84%, closing at 6,023.66. On the main exchange, foreign and institutional investors were net sellers, dumping over 4.9 trillion Korean won, or nearly $3.4 billion US, while retail investors moved in to buy. The KOSDAQ also suffered heavy losses, falling 7.72% to end at 705.85. A sharp plunge in both futures and spot prices first triggered sell-side sidecars across both markets, halting automated trading for 5 minutes. While this marked the KOSPI's 22nd sidecar this year, the decline didn't stop there. As losses expanded past 8%, a level 1 circuit breaker was activated on the main board for the 8th time this year. By noon, the sell-off spiraled onto the KOSDAQ, triggering another circuit breaker as the index likewise collapsed. Market heavyweights Samsung Electronics and SK Hynix tumbled around 13% and 14% respectively, impacting the KOSPI market hugely. Investor jitters spiked following the blockbuster Shanghai listing of Chinese memory maker Changxin Memory Technologies. In addition, reports that China is developing its own DUV lithography machines, which project microscopic circuit designs onto wafers, stoked concerns over rising Chinese tech independence. Investor anxieties increased following reports that NVIDIA agreed to guarantee up to $250 billion for OpenAI's long-term data center leases. The news escalated controversy over circular financing across the AI industry, sending NVIDIA down around 5% overnight.
It's unrealistic to expect immediate cash flow improvements from AI firms. But as oil prices and treasury yields stabilize, market fears will calm. If semiconductor exports stay strong through August and September, current uncertainties should largely clear up.
Meanwhile, the Korean won stays above the 1,460 level against the U.S. dollar amid increased risk aversion, even as international crude oil prices slid following a pause in Middle East military strikes. 백주희, Arirang News.
But the volatile ride may not be over just yet. That's because investors around the world are closely watching a wave of earnings reports from major tech firms this week, which could set the tone for global markets. Lee Ji-yeon looks at what's ahead.
Wall Street and the local stock market are bracing for a wild ride this week, with earnings report due from major U.S. big tech firms and SK Hynix. 4 major tech giants are set to report their results this week. Microsoft and Meta lead off with their results after market close on Wednesday, followed by Apple and Amazon on Thursday. Wall Street forecasts show that most of these 4 so-called Magnificent 7 giants are expected to post revenue and earnings per share, or EPS, estimates that meet or beat the same quarter last year. For Microsoft's upcoming fiscal fourth quarter results, analysts expect diluted EPS of $4.24 on revenue of approximately $87.6 billion. On the same day, Meta Platforms is expected to report its fiscal second quarter results, with consensus EPS estimates clustering around $7.19 and revenue projected near $60.3 billion. The following day, Apple is scheduled to report its fiscal third quarter results, with analysts expecting revenue near $109 billion and diluted EPS of $1.89. For Amazon, consensus expects total second quarter revenue of approximately $196 billion, with EPS projected at around $1.82. Analysts stress that along with top-line revenue, profitability also matters. In the case of Alphabet, despite strong earnings, its stock fell last week due to heavy spending, putting the focus on the cost of AI.
Even if earnings turn out well, it ultimately comes down to profitability. Last quarter, stocks dropped sharply after results came out because margins fell short, so we're expecting a similar trend this time around.
However, as the recent drop in semiconductor stocks reflects market uncertainty and downside risks are mostly priced in, analysts expect a rebound to be more likely than a further fall.
This time, if earnings come out strong, ongoing expectations around fundamentals will likely drive a rebound.
On the domestic front, SK Hynix is set to report its second quarter earnings on Wednesday. Analysts project second quarter operating profit to top 64 trillion won, or around $43 billion, up nearly 600% year-on-year. Meanwhile, the benchmark KOSPI lost ground on Tuesday as the global chipmaker sell-off deepened. Attentions are on the semiconductor earnings to see if they can shift market momentum. Lee Ji-yeon, Arirang News.
Shifting focus, North Korea's external trade saw double-digit growth last year on the back of surging exports. According to a report released by the Korea Trade Investment Promotion Agency on Tuesday, the regime's total trade volume in 2025 reached $3.12 billion, up 16% from the previous year. Exports jumped 30% to $468 million. Now, this marks the highest export volume since the sharp decline in trade triggered by UN Security Council sanctions in 2018. Imports rose 13.9% to $2.65 billion, resulting in a widened trade deficit of $2.19 billion. China remains Pyongyang's dominant trading partner, accounting for 98.2% of its total trade volume. Back here at home, Korea's relentless heat wave is intensifying, with temperatures approaching 40 degrees Celsius in parts of the country. But forecasters warn the worst may still be ahead, raising concerns over heat-related illnesses. Cho Young-eun explains what's driving the extreme heat and how the government is responding.
Extreme heat grips the country as temperatures in Seoul reached 32 degrees on Tuesday. According to the Korea Meteorological Administration, heat wave alerts remain in effect across most of the country. Severe heat warnings have been issued for parts of Gyeongsangnam-do and southeastern Jeollanam-do provinces, with temperatures in Yangsan, Gyeongsangnam-do province soaring to 39 degrees Celsius. The government raised its heat wave disaster alert to the highest level on Monday and activated the Central Disaster and Safety Countermeasure Headquarters.
Under the influence of a high-pressure system over the Korean peninsula, most regions will see intense daytime heat and tropical nights, with inland parts of Gyeongsangnam-do province forecast to experience particularly extreme temperatures.
As the heat wave drags on, the human toll is also rising, with health authorities reporting 73 heat-related illnesses on Monday alone. Since the seasonal monitoring system began on May 15, a total of 1,482 people have suffered heat-related illnesses, with 9 deaths recorded. The Korea Disease Control and Prevention Agency urged people to take extra precautions, especially those most vulnerable to extreme heat, including outdoor workers and older adults. Meanwhile, tropical night advisories also remain in place for most parts of the country. Heat accumulated during the day continues into the night, while warm, humid air keeps flowing in overnight, preventing temperatures from dropping sufficiently. Forecasters say the worst may still be ahead, with both the North Pacific High and the Tibetan High dominating the atmosphere over the Korean peninsula. Combined with strong sunshine, hot and humid air is expected to remain trapped over the country, and the sweltering conditions are likely to persist for the time being. Cho Young-eun, Arirang News.
And because of this weather, people here in Korea are finding various ways to beat the extreme heat. Our Shin So-eun takes us to one of Seoul's busiest summer escapes and shows us how people are staying cool in their daily lives.
Barely a weekend has passed since the monsoon rain subsided. But Seoul is already confronting another weather threat, an intense heat wave. Around 6.14 million people are expected to travel each day from July 25th through the end of the month to head to the beaches or other vacation spots. But residents can also beat the heat without leaving Seoul.
The temperature here at Yeouido Hangang Park currently stands at 31 degrees Celsius. The clouds are offering little relief, and high humidity makes the heat feel even worse. 6 Han River swimming pools are now open until 10 p.m. through the end of August.
By 11 a.m., the pool is already buzzing with families and young children splashing in the water, while some office workers had taken the day off to sunbathe and unwind. With admission costing just 3,000 to 5,000 won and special DJ parties held on weekends, it has become a lively and affordable summer escape.
The pool is close to home and reasonably priced. It's also well maintained, so by playing here, I hope my child can have fun and learn how to interact and play with other kids.
I came with my friends, and we're having a great time. It feels really cool and refreshing, and I came with my family.
According to the government, a heatwave advisory, the lowest level on the government scale, is issued when the daily high is expected to reach 33 degrees Celsius or higher for at least 2 consecutive days. With the latest forecast showing temperatures across the capital climbing into the mid-30s and high humidity making it feel even hotter, the highest level heat alert could be issued if the apparent temperature is expected to reach 38 degrees Celsius. In response, the government has installed cooling fog systems at around 230 locations across Seoul. In places like parks where jogging and walking can increase the risk of heat-related illness, fine mist sprays help lower body temperature. Air-conditioned smart shelters have also been installed in major commuting areas, filtering out fine dust and vehicle emissions, while more than 4,000 community and senior centers have been converted into free public cooling shelters. Still, experts warn against prolonged outdoor activity as El Niño could intensify the heat and push conditions to life-threatening levels. Shin So-eun, Arirang News.
Now to politics. The National Assembly is preparing to return to full-scale legislative work as the lineup of standing committees nears completion. Now, against that backdrop, newly elected Speaker Cho Jung-sik held his first press conference on Tuesday, outlining his priorities for the remainder of the Assembly's 4-year term. Our correspondent An Sung-jin has this report.
An assembly that opens up the future for the people. That's what National Assembly Speaker Cho Jung-sik said would be the slogan for the second half of the 2026 National Assembly during his first press conference on Tuesday. Amid growing global uncertainty, climate change, and deepening political polarization, Cho outlined 4 key priorities for his new vision. At the heart of his agenda is strengthening what he called an assembly of action for the people through participation. He pledged to institutionalize democratic values by marking December 3rd as a People's Sovereignty Day, following the Martial Law Declaration, and launching a committee to lay the groundwork to make revisions to the Constitution. That's what he also highlighted when asked how he hopes the second half of the Assembly will be remembered, as he underlined the role it has in safeguarding democracy.
Whether or not people notice the work of the National Assembly every day, I want people to feel that it is of help to their livelihoods and improving their future.
He also vowed to accelerate legislation, especially aimed at improving livelihoods, and strive for bipartisan cooperation on policies covering social issues such as childcare, education, and housing. The speaker further added that the Assembly would prioritize legislation supporting strategic industries such as AI, semiconductors, biotechnology, and K-culture to boost future growth. This would involve launching a new public-private council to strengthen cooperation with businesses and creating an ecosystem where small and medium-sized enterprises would grow alongside large conglomerates. Cho placed particular emphasis on parliamentary diplomacy, calling it a key pillar of Korea's national strategy.
Parliamentary diplomacy has often been criticized for lacking continuity whenever a new assembly begins. But diplomacy is built over time, not in 1 or 2 years. We intend to build those networks by expanding not only our outreach abroad, but also diplomatic exchanges with visiting foreign delegations here in Korea.
He announced plans to establish a new diplomatic and security strategy center, deepen cooperation with the EU, and strengthen networks with overseas legislatures. The National Assembly Speaker says he wants the Assembly as both a guardian of democracy and a driver for people's livelihoods. Whether that vision becomes reality will depend on how much lawmakers can accomplish during the remainder of the session. An Sung-jin, Arirang News.
On the diplomatic front, Korea has renewed calls for Japan to fully acknowledge the history of forced Korean labor at its UNESCO-listed industrial heritage sites. Speaking at a World Heritage Committee meeting in Busan on Tuesday, Seoul's ambassador to UNESCO, Kim Ji-hee, said Japan had still not fulfilled commitments made a decade ago. She said displays at Tokyo's Industrial Heritage Information Center failed to reflect the experiences of Koreans brought against their will and forced to work in harsh conditions. Japan said it had responded sincerely to the committee's decisions and would continue dialogue with the parties concerned. Over in the Middle East, Oman has reportedly put forward a new proposal to Iran aimed at easing tensions over the Strait of Hormuz. Now the move comes as the U.S. and Iran have gone 3 days without exchanging fresh strikes, raising hopes the two sides could return to the negotiating table. Kim So-young has the latest.
A Gulf source has told Reuters that Oman has put forth a new proposal to Iran, a joint regional mechanism to manage the Strait of Hormuz, funded by voluntary fees from the countries that use it. It's modeled on the Strait of Malacca, and under the plan, Iran would no longer hold sole control of the waterway. The proposal comes after a fragile pause in fighting. The U.S. suspended its air campaign against Iran over the weekend, raising hopes that shipping through the strait could resume. President Trump says talks with Tehran are now underway.
We're having good talks, so we'll see what happens. I think there's a good chance that something could happen, and if it does, good. If it doesn't, we go back to doing what we were doing 2 days ago.
But Tehran is pushing back. Iran's foreign ministry says there are no current negotiations with Washington.
Do not pay much attention to the media speculation. As I said, we currently have no negotiations with America. The negotiations that we have, and which may genuinely be subject to different interpretations, are the negotiations we have with Oman.
Iranian spokesperson Esmail Baghaei made those comments at a briefing in Tehran on Monday local time. Separately, Iranian Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi spoke by phone with his Omani and Saudi counterparts discussing ways to ease tensions around the strait. For now, the pause is holding. But both sides agree that if diplomacy doesn't deliver, the strikes could start again. Kim So-young, Arirang News.
Heatwave alerts are in place for most of the country. Parts of Jeollanam-do and Gyeongsangnam-do provinces, including Gwangyang, remain under severe heatwave warnings, with some areas entering their 4th straight day. Even after sunset, temperatures won't drop much. Tropical night advisories are in place for many areas nationwide, and Seoul has now logged a 6th consecutive tropical night. In weather like this, the risk of heat-related illnesses goes up, so make sure you're taking extra care of yourself. Under mostly sunny skies, strong sunshine will dominate across the country tomorrow. UV levels will be very high nationwide, so don't forget your sunscreen before heading outside. Tomorrow, Seoul will start the day at 26 degrees Celsius, Chuncheon 24, Daejeon 25 degrees. Then by the afternoon, Seoul will get up to 33 degrees, while both Daegu and Gyeongju will top out at 38 degrees. With no meaningful rain in the forecast for the time being, this long stretch of heat isn't going anywhere anytime soon. Now here's a look at the weather around the world.
And that's Newscenter for this Tuesday. From all of us here at Arirang, thanks for watching, and don't forget to stay cool and stay safe.
Here are 22 volumes. At first glance, they may seem like ordinary old books. But the moment you unfold and connect them one by one, a remarkable scene emerges. A mid-19th century map of Korea, hand-drawn with its mountains and rivers, the Daedongyeojido. Fully unfolded, it becomes a massive map about 6.7 meters in height. But what's truly astonishing is not its size. It vividly depicts how mountain ranges extend from Baekdusan Mountain to form the land, and how rivers win their way through villages. Like modern maps, it uses symbols clearly, with 10 re-intervals to guide travelers. A truly groundbreaking idea for its time. Another reason this map is remarkable, a woodblock print. Made practical for all classes, 양반, elite, and commoners alike to use. Comparable even to modern surveying techniques, this map was not created by the genius of Kim Jong-ho alone. Beginning with the early Joseon world map, 혼일강리 역대국도 지도. It builds upon the tradition of earlier scholars, such as 정상기 and 신경준, culminating in this monumental masterpiece. Perhaps Joseon sought to reflect its care for the lives of its people within this map. Across rugged mountain ranges and winding rivers, countless roads were carved into woodblocks. Along the grand paths traced by the 대동여지도, we now take a new step forward into history.
저기 숲이 돼볼게 너는 자그마키 많은 언덕 위를 오르며 날 바라볼래 나의 작은 마음 한 구석이어도 사랑이 뭔지는 잘 몰라도 사랑해 넌 가끔 꿈에 찾아와 내 기분이 어떤지 알려주고
When did it all begin? The beginning of joy embedded in daily life, where steps of learning meet a bigger world, and history coexists. The legend continues. Innovative technologies come together to unfold a new future, building a better tomorrow. A joy accessible to all, always present in your daily life. JDC.
Welcome to Within the Frame, where we bring the most pressing issues across the globe into focus. I'm Kim Mo-gyan. South Korean President Lee Jae-myung has wrapped up the U.S. leg of his overseas tour, where artificial intelligence took center stage. During his visit to San Francisco, he unveiled the San Francisco AI Declaration, outlining Korea's ambition to become a key player in the global AI supply chain, while expanding the Korea-U.S. alliance beyond traditional security into technology and innovation. So what does this declaration actually mean for the future of the alliance and Korea's role in the global AI landscape? To discuss that, we're joined in the studio by Professor Min Jung-hoon of the Korean National Diplomatic Academy. A very big welcome.
My pleasure.
So, Professor Min, we would want to start with the latest visit to San Francisco. It focused more on AI rather than security. I wonder, how did you see it? And also, what kind of message do you think Korea was trying to send?
Well, as an expert in the field of diplomacy and security, it was unusual to see that South Korean president visited San Francisco instead of Washington, D.C. or New York. So it shows that the purpose of the visit was to enhance economic and technological cooperation between South Korea and United States. In other words, economic security was the main theme of the visit. And as you know, the major companies from South Korea and the U.S. which attended the San Francisco AI Summit, like Samsung, SK, Hyundai, and Naver, as well as the NVIDIA, OpenAI, Broadcom, Anthropic, and Microsoft. They embarked on a massive AI collaboration encompassing semiconductors, AI data centers, and AI factories, robots, and autonomous driving, which consist of the probably the growth engine for the future economic growth. And this brought the San Francisco AI Declaration, which aimed to foster South Korea as a global AI production base and a key supply chain hub. So personally, I think this collaboration is a follow-up measure to concretize the three major AI mega projects that the South Korean government announced last month. So the President Lee's visit to San Francisco this time shows that the mega projects are starting off and going through the full-scale implementation phase.
Right. Now, speaking of the AI declaration, Professor Min, from a diplomatic standpoint, what do you think is the biggest significance of this?
Well, I think that the San Francisco AI Declaration is South Korea's vision for AI and its determination announced by President Lee Jae-myung at the San Francisco AI Summit. So on the one hand, through the declaration, President Lee unveiled a vision to foster South Korea into a global AI production base and innovation hub. And it's also a vision to elevate South Korea into an irreplaceable core country in the global AI supply chain. So the plan envisions that South Korea will become a global hub that supplies AI infrastructure based on the world-class semiconductor production capabilities and the manufacturing base. On the other hand, the declaration embodies the determination to elevate South Korea from a mere technology follower into a leading the country that drives the global AI ecosystem and an irreplaceable core hub of the global AI supply chain. You know that nowadays the world is fiercely competing around the high-tech industries and strategic industries. And AI competition is the center of the competition. So the South Korea diplomatically will show the great ambition that it will be the core country which lead the very important the economic engine for the future growth.
Right. So it shows Korea not just as a semiconductor supplier, but also a trusted AI partner from now on. Now, do you think that could actually reshape the role of Korea in terms of ROK-U.S alliance?
Well, as you know, currently the U.S.-China strategic competition is getting intensified around the advanced technologies and strategic industries, and the AI at the center of the competition. And many countries in the world want to see a reliable leadership and share the benefits of the technological advancements. So based on the national strengths, like a democratic system and resilience, world-class manufacturing capabilities, and economic power, South Korea will be able to play a leading role that the global community can enjoy the benefit of the AI technologies. And such a role can be clearly seen by the Global AI Initiative that President Lee announced at the Gyeongju APEC Summit last year. And the declaration shows that the Global AI Initiative is being activated and moving forward to take its shape. So it will reaffirm that South Korea is the most trustworthy ally and a partner to the United States. And it will also provide the momentum that South Korea will establish itself as a core, global core power.
It sounds like a meaningful shift indeed. Now, President Lee has also said that the alliance should expand beyond security into technology, innovation, and also startups as well. How much of a significance do you see on that?
Well, as President Lee Jae-myung mentioned, the ROK-U.S. alliance needed to be evolved into a comprehensive strategic alliance that expands the scope of their cooperation into security, economy, culture, human exchange, technology, innovation, and startup investment and incubation. And considering that the world is going through a tough competition around the advanced technologies and strategic industries, South Korea needed to secure its future growth engine and competitiveness by strengthening cooperation with the United States and other technologically advanced countries like Europe and Japan. In particular, given that the U.S. holds an advantage in foundational technologies and the capital flow, and it also leads innovation cooperation in high-tech industries. I think it's essential for South Korea to cooperate closely with the U.S. to secure its future growth engines and enhance its competitiveness. In other words, the advanced technologies and strategic industries, such as semiconductors, large volume batteries, artificial intelligence, biotechnologies, and the shipbuilding, nuclear power, and the defense industry, they are key to South Korea's future economic growth and prosperity. So I think South Korea needs to enhance its technological capabilities and strengthen its competitiveness through close collaboration with the leaders in the fields, mainly with the United States. So I think it's necessary for the ROK-U.S. alliance to be evolved into the very important field of competition, like the economy, technology, and strategic industries.
Right, so a lot of areas of cooperation and opportunities to look forward to, looking forward. Then, Professor Min, so in order for this declaration to kind of develop into a lasting Korea-U.S. AI partnership, what do you think we should look forward to?
Communication and collaboration. And again, the world is going through the era of information revolution. And it is experiencing and witnessing the fundamental change of the way of life. We stand in the middle of that kind of the dramatic shift. And the South Korea is standing with other major countries in advanced countries, advanced technologies like U.S., China, and Japan and the European Unions. And for the three major mega projects, it's just the beginning of the projects. And personally, I think it will be a long-term projects or the plan to determine South Korea's economic prosperity and its international standing. And I think the Lee Jae-myung presidency is important because it needs to establish a foundation for such important mega projects. So based on the robust ROK-U.S. alliance, the two countries, South Korea and the U.S., continue to maintain its communication and expand the scope of depth of their collaboration and the cooperation. Strategic, the importance of value of South Korea still is very big for the United States and then other major technological advanced countries. So, we have the plenty of room and the possibility that South Korea will enhance its cooperation with the United States. So communicate and collaborate.
A very important reminder to conclude our discussion tonight. Thank you so much for your insights, Professor Min.
Thanks so much.
So that was the diplomatic picture, but ultimately the success of the San Francisco AI Declaration will also be measured by its economic impact. So from investment and innovation to Korea's competitiveness in the global AI race, let's also take a closer look by connecting to Hwa Kyun Kim, Professor of Banking and Finance at Texas A&M University's Mays Business School. Welcome to the program, Professor Kim.
Thank you. Thanks for the invite.
So, Professor, let's dive right into the economic impact. So, among the main outcomes of the visit were the semiconductor partnerships between Korean companies and major global AI firms as well. How significant could those partnerships actually be?
Well, I think it is significant, definitely. And in terms of the dollar amount, I look at the press reports and it was around $950 billion or about 1,400 trillion won. So it's obviously a pretty big number. If you look into the details, then it actually has included a couple of things, SK's letter of intent with NVIDIA. That I think seems to be around 500 billion, and Samsung's actually MOU with Broadcom is around 200 billion. I think it's also interesting that they're sort of somewhat divided in terms of the alliances team. And also some of the other arrangements Hyundai and the Google and NVIDIA and also all others Boston Dynamics. But these are supply revenue, some cap expenditure, and some of them are just estimate because these are mostly just memoranda or letter of intents. Things will get a little more detailed, I think, as time goes by, as people just get to know more about this. But to me, what stands out, I think, a little more was the duration of these potential contracts. So as we know, memory has always been a textbook example of the cyclical businesses. So contracts typically ran roughly a year, and prices actually swung very, very in a volatile fashion, as we also now see in terms of stock prices, actually about the future expectations of these prices in supply. And everybody, in a sense, built capacity at the top, and then a lot of capex. And the industry is probably going to, to spend a lot of money, and some of which will be probably just excess, actually, supply in some sense. So what these agreements potentially do is move Korea's two largest suppliers, Samsung and the SK Hynix, over at least 3 to 5 year longer term agreements, which I think this is a structural change in terms of how the industries actually do the business for this matter. And I think this is actually helping a lot, I think, Korean firms, because they can now do a little more with confidence in terms of their capex expenditure, I think. So that actually, if it is going to be really happening with the 5 year contracts, or even 3 to 7 year, or whatever this longer term than 1 year, this is going to be definitely helpful for Korean companies to do more stable businesses. And also, I think the bargaining story is somewhat involved here, in that now from the standpoint of the market making, actually the position, the Samsung and Hynix and other Korean companies actually can probably just play more leading roles in terms of setting the prices or negotiating more actively in terms of these facilities and things like that. So yes, caveat is it's still MOU and letter of intents, but if it actually is going to be really happening, I think this is a great thing.
Then, Professor Kim, if those kinds of partnerships actually proceed to move forward, President Lee said he hopes to position Korea as both a global AI supply hub and a testing ground for AI technologies as well. How realistic or feasible is that goal?
Well, it depends on how we define. I mean, in terms of AI hub part, the first part, I think in a sense, Korea is already, I think, a AI hub, because it provides the most important parts of the AI businesses. So it builds memory, it builds actually the SSD, so all this kind of the HBM, right? So in a sense, given that Korea actually provides almost 70 to 80% of this, the high bandwidth memory and stuff like that, in a sense, it's already almost 80% done in terms of AI hub. Of course, if we narrow this, into the multiple sort of spokes, then I think we have to think about like a software side and other parts. So that one, I think, is probably what the President Lee was trying to also, I think, improve upon or wants to just reach. If that's the part, then I think Korea has to make additional efforts actually for the other parts of the AI businesses, which clearly is somewhat lacking, but I think clearly catching up. So I think those kind of the software part and other parts of the chips like logic chips and things like that, I think would be the next in line to accomplish this AI hub status. In terms of the testing bed, if this refers to the user base, I'm sure that the Korea is not going to be lacking in that regard because I think I saw reports that I think the Korean people seem to be one of the most the actively just adopting the AI technology. So I think there will be enough users, and I think who would be interested in using the early the stages of this AI softwares and then also the technologies. What's going to be tougher, I think, for this testing round is more like, this new hardwares and services, and etc. I think for that, I think the energy and all other actually parts should be also involved because at the end of the day, you have to make things. And to make things, you need like energy such as electricity and other things. So I think for that part, probably the Korean government together with the local governments and also the companies actually have to do some additional work.
Right, but on the flip side, researchers and entrepreneurs, they still point to some challenges like visa barriers, limited long-term research support, and attracting global talent as well. Which of these or others do you see as the biggest obstacle moving forward?
I think you mentioned well. So I think in terms of like these, basically at the end of the day, we need people. Human capital, I think, is going to be probably always the number one item at the end of the day. Once, of course, the general level AI is developed, maybe something different. But I still, even at this stage, human capital is going to be probably the top priority. So in terms of like, doing these research support and the attracting global talent and all these kind of things, Korea is clearly somewhat lacking, I think. The visiting, I think, for just small conferences and things like that, I think that Korea is actually doing great in terms of like visa and everything. But for longer term support, and especially for those kind of the potentially failing businesses, right? The research. We never know when this is going to take off. So I think it is important, for the government or the companies actually to give some commitments to the researchers and universities. Even if it looks like, it's not really working, it has to actually have a little more patience so that I think this is going to eventually work. So for that type of things, maybe it's related to the Korean culture, but I think the Korea seems to prefer like, really fast sort of responses and then development. For that one, it's not going to be always the helpful for this type of the big interactions and the new developments, because it's a new era in some sense, right? So we never know what's going to happen in terms of how this one turns into the next. When we think about like the internet era, clearly, it was actually evolving a lot, I think, over the last 2 decades. So I think we will actually see even more changes and the big the shifts. So I think the patience and the strong and the sustainable support, I think, from both the government, university, companies actually will be very necessary for this.
It will be interesting to see how those challenges would be addressed by the country. Now, finally, Professor Kim, if you would name just one priority that would enable the government to focus on to turn the San Francisco Declaration into lasting investment, what would it be?
From the government side, I would say the cost side of these, the social overhead, I think, projects. So I think I would say energy and electricity, because, these kind of the new CapEx and then the new mega projects seem to involve a lot of electricity and energy. I'm sure that I think, the experts actually will work on this. But the financing and also the providing these the electricity the power plants and all this kind of things actually takes time. So I think the planning well is going to be extremely important in this regard, and also the related financing part is not going to be a trivial issue. So I think I would call like the cost side of these the projects actually as the big priority at this stage.
Right. So it will certainly be interesting to see whether this declaration could actually become a lasting turning point for Korea's AI strategy. Professor Kim, thank you so much for your insights tonight.
Always a pleasure.
And that'll be all from us on Within the Frame. Be sure to tune in again next time as we continue to explore the stories that matter. Till then, stay informed and engaged.